Hello, my name is Olu Osha. I like talking about American presidents and I talk about US history and international human rights law as well. Today is March the 9th, 2026, and the Dow Jones closed at around 47,740 points thereabouts. But it's been a relative drop of about 1,237 points since February 28th, 2026, at the start of the US Israeli versus Iran war, since it started. Um, yeah, so that's a huge drop. So that's roughly about 2.5% slashed off the stock market. Um, Now, prior to that, just about 2 weeks before the start of the war, the Dow Jones had actually reached its highest, its 52-week highest. This is interesting that I'm discussing this because I used to be a stockbroker. I used to be a financial advisor with some major banks. I'm not going to mention them, but yeah, I used to be a licensed stockbroker, so it was my job to analyze what's the stock market every day, right? So and execute trades. Yeah, so there's been a significant drop since the start of the war. Um, so at on February 10, 2026, in fact, the Dow Jones had reached its highest in a year at about 50,512 points thereabout. So since then, there's actually been a significant slash in the stock market. So over, say, 2007, more than 2,700 points since February. So that's been a hit. And of course, it's been in the news that a barrel of oil went over, $100 yesterday. Today it was approaching $120 a barrel. Gas prices went up in the US. America's not really feeling the pinch now because it's interesting that I think, when I think about it, America seized, commandeered Venezuela's oil on January the 3rd, 2026, at the beginning of the year, with the rendition of Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela. Venezuela, of course, has the largest oil reserves, proven oil reserves in the world. Once America commandeered that oil, which is easier for America to have access to, and of course, we have our own oil as well, and Canada is our main supplier. We get over 60% of our oil from Canada. Um, I guess this may have, when I think about it, President Trump may have commandeered Venezuela's oil because he was planning to attack Iran, because knowing that, well, that the Strait of Hormuz would be closed due to ongoing conflict. But I think President Trump didn't anticipate that the conflict with Iran will last as long or would have the tendency to be protracted, and he would not achieve his goals. Um, of course, they have the Iranian government, Iranian Republic has elected its new supreme leader, the son of the assassinated Ali Khomeini, and the new supreme leader is Koj Bada. It's hard for me to pronounce his first name, so I guess I'll get used to it. I'm not going to uh, butcher it. I'm not going to call it not to butcher it. But his son, the son of Ayatollah Ali Khomeini, is the new supreme leader of Iran, which is interesting. I learned that he's supposed to be a real estate dealer like President Trump as well. It's that's kind of bizarre. But in any event, there have been real significant economic costs to the war, and from comments, remarks, recent remarks by President Trump, it looks like the campaign is not going to go on much longer and there won't be boots on the ground. I don't anticipate America winning that boots on the ground. because Iran's just going to continue with its asymmetric warfare, and it will be able to use that, be able to execute that asymmetric warfare more effectively with America's boots on the ground, and it can resort to other means, right? As I said, my fear is the use of chemical and biological weapons against American forces should there be boots on the ground in Iran. It's interesting that so America struck, and what Iran ended up doing was it's one form of asymmetric warfare that it launched was it attacked the military bases and embassies of the U.S. in the GCC countries. We just meant that Iran ended up attacking GCC countries as well, sending drones and missiles, into GCC countries, which has disrupted, the flow of their business. Apart from selling oil, right? The GCC countries make a tremendous amount of money off tourism, right? Off tourism, that has significantly impacted, the tourist industry. The ongoing hostilities, of course, and the drone strikes, the missile strikes have significantly impacted, disrupted, business for the GCC countries. Interestingly, even though there's been a strongly worded uh, rebuke by the president of Qatar and some other GCC countries against Iran, because of course Iran has been striking them, has been hitting them, right? Because of America's significant assets in the GCC countries and the bases. Um, they've been targets of Iran's asymmetric warfare. However, note that it's been 10 days, none of them have actually attacked Iran. So it's one thing for them to make comments and make statements and criticize Iran. Obviously, they'll do that. And, you know, in response, Iran's president was actually basically kowtowing to them. It appeared it was apologizing for the strikes. Um, and in this case, that's where you see the difference in Western culture, right? Western, the lack of understanding from a Western perspective of another culture, culture. Um, I'm I'm an American citizen, but I'm Nigerian. I'm Yoruba, and there's a culture of respectability. There's a culture of dignity. There's a culture of, you know, spoken words, and empathy and things like that that don't resonate in the West. And this might be, one of those things that are being lost in translation. But in any event, talking of communication, President Trump has been sending mixed signals, in from demanding unconditional surrender, like using the language uh, of, well, we're probably going to annihilate your civilization and drop nuclear bombs, just like President Truman did in the Second World War. With the unconditional surrender demand. Uh, he's now sort of pivoted again. He's switched, and now he's saying, well, it looks like, he says that the mission's complete, and the war's not going to go on for long and things like that. So it's looking like he's already plotted an easy exit. My father used to tell me, my father was an economist and a bank chairman and CEO. So he used to tell me you don't throw good money after bad money. So sometimes you just cut your losses, and sometimes the wisest thing to do is just to withdraw. And it looks like that's what America is going to be doing. What I wanted to do today was talk about the damage, right? The costs of the war. There's been reputational damage for America. Sometimes when you have power, your perception of power is better you know, than the execution, the use of the power, right? Because you can abuse that power, and then you diminish yourself in the eyes of those who feared your power. And that's sort of what America has just done. Um, Sometimes when you're threatening somebody's existence, when you're an existential threat, right? So you're threatening somebody's survival, or an entity, a being's survival, they're going to fight, right? And then you see resources, they will marshal resources they didn't realize they had, or they didn't have to, draw on. They'll marshal those resources, and you see the rise of the underdog, and the big Goliath, may just, they'll drop a notch at least. Um, so sort of that's kind of like what's going on. Um, there's been the reputational damage. America was viewed as the policeman of the world. Now Iran's been calling on GCC countries to expel, the United States and Israeli ambassadors and things like that, and or their assets, to cut off ties from them. It's funny that all of this, the actions of Iran in attacking the GCC nations and the military bases of the US in those areas, these were anticipated a long time ago, because I'd read an article that was written in 2020. At the time, President Trump had assassinated the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, and Iran had vowed retribution, retaliation, and it was anticipated then that Iran would attack, the GCC countries and the military bases of U.S. military bases in the Persian Gulf, in the GCC countries. So this is something America has always been aware of, right? Um, and Iran has, you know, so today, as of today, Iran has actually waged that war, executed those strikes, the asymmetrical strikes, using very cheap drones and ballistic missiles, which they've called the poor man's cruise missile, right? Um, Iran has, targeted, Israeli and U.S. and GCC sites with very cheap drones, right? Very cheap but effective drones, costing between 20,000 to 50,000 dollars per unit, while the U.S. government and the GCC and their allies have actually had to use $1 billion defense systems, right, to fend off these drone strikes. So it's been very costly. Iran has had the cost advantage at a ratio of 100 to 1, right? It's been very costly for America to wage this 10-day war with Iran. And it's, some, I've seen analysts on TV claim that it's been costing America approximately $1 billion a day to wage war. America is not, it's not an empire, it's not a monarchy, we're a republic, and it's Congress that that has the power of the purse. And the United States government, our military, they get their money, their appropriations, whatever, ultimately come from taxpayer money. So taxpayers have a say in what goes on. The longer a war goes on for America, the more disenchanted, the more disaffection from taxpayers, the more pressure they get from taxpayers. The Vietnam War that went on for so long, the reason America pulled out wasn't because they couldn't defeat Vietnam. No, it was because of public opinion, right? Every day, kids were on the street protesting. Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? So it was a very unpopular war. So um, there's when war is waged, there are many factors that go into war, right? There's a propaganda war, and then there's a public opinion war as well, right? To either get the public on your side, or if the public pushes back, uh, you know, then the campaign, the military misadventure is subsequently can be circumvented, right? During the Vietnam War, It was the what was called the credibility gap, when it was found that you know the president, the administration kept telling the public that wow, that America's doing so well, they're winning this war, they're doing so well, and all that stuff, minimal losses, and when it eventually came out with the release of the Pentagon Papers by Daniel Ellsberg, it was the credibility of the government was significantly dashed, right? And so today, as the war is going on, again, this is one of the first times I've seen that the public opinion is immediately against the U.S. government, the administration actually going to war. Normally, uh, presidents enjoy this massive popularity when they want to start a war. During the Gulf War, the you know um, the polls, right? The polls of what's his name, President George H.W. Bush, who led the Gulf War in 1991 against Iraq, surged a lot. During, especially when Desert Storm was so successful, the public was massively behind the president. He had 9% approval ratings in the polls. Similarly, even George Bush in the Iraqi war in 2003, very high opinion, approval ratings in the polls as well, from between 70 to 90%. So there's always this surge. The public normally gets behind the president. It doesn't matter. It becomes a non-partisan issue when you're going to use American troops, right? Send soldiers to a foreign land to fight wars. But right now, from the onset, there's been this backlash, and very negative backlash against the administration for launching an unprovoked war against Iran. So that's probably part of what's going to pull back President Trump. In addition to the hits the economy is taking, it's costing America $1 billion a day so far. That's a lot of money. Um, Americans have other needs, and when when a full blown war, if there's a full scale invasion, if this war becomes protracted, there's a risk it can explode into the Third World War. I wasn't being blithe when I mentioned the possibility of President Trump dropping using nuclear weapons against Iran. Um, while there are no international agreements and no binding international agreements that outlaw America's use of nuclear weapons, um, I can, we can, and it's not easy to hold President Trump or any of his generals who use nuclear weapons against Iran. It's not easy to hold them, charge them as war criminals, but I think um, the international community um, will be heavily against the United States. Um, by the way, yes, while the president actually has the sole authority to use nuclear weapons, the generals can disobey that order. Generals can, if the use is disproportionate and it's indiscriminate, right? So it would be disproportionate and indiscriminate to use nuclear weapons against Iran, because it will be against the civilian population. Especially America's been bombing, civilian sites so far. The Israeli forces, they've been bombing civilian sites. So President Trump also notably changed. He sort of backpedaled from his initial remarks, objectives that Iran must never have a nuclear weapon. Today, his recent comments, was it today or yesterday, he was saying that at least take a longer time for Iran uh, to possess its nuclear weapon. So he didn't say it was now an impossibility, right? That it would never happen. He'd now backpedaled. I guess he's come to realize that it's not something America can prevent. America cannot prevent Iran from possessing nuclear weapons. And at this stage, nations who possess nuclear weapons use it as a deterrent. They're not going to go into a nuclear war because, again, the use of nuclear weapons, America is the only nation in the world that's ever used nuclear weapons in armed conflict. During the Second World War against Japan, it will obliterate the world. If nations get into a nuclear war, the whole world will be destroyed. Nobody's going to do that. There's no need to get into that. So it's nations just have it as a deterrent right now, not to feel threatened. Um, North Korea has it. The administration has called various leaders of various people mad people and things like that. That's we need to be very careful how we call people mad. You can't call an entire you can call an individual crazy, right? Maybe if you could call Hitler crazy, but you could say Germans were crazy, right? You could say everybody. Just the same way, you just don't want to indiscriminately say Americans are all crazy. Another nation doesn't want to call Americans all crazy because that would be racist, right? Based on what? You just can't call a whole collection of people, nation of people, crazy. The leader of North Korea does have nuclear weapons, and I've often heard, President Trump, call those, call North Koreans crazy as well, which is again that's racist, right? People have chosen their own system. Americans, we have our own system as well, and they probably when you go to Europe, I've lived in Europe, Europeans, and that's racist, but Europeans call Americans crazy. In case Americans don't know, they call American in Europe. You go to Europe, they call Americans crazy. So that America does possess nuclear weapons. North Korea does not use its nuclear weapons. So the same thing, but it possesses nuclear weapons as a deterrence, right? America has not gone to seize uh, its leader, right, or assassinate its leader, because the nuclear weapons are there as a deterrent. But in any event, uh, the war has cost a lot, and it would tend to cost more the longer it takes, and that seems to be the strategy of Iran in asymmetric warfare because it understands America has the larger, mightier military force and resources, but the longer it can draw it out, right? The longer it can draw the war out, the more it is to its advantage. And it has these cheaper weapons, right, that are effective and they're doing their job, right? In it's the cheaper weapons are achieving Iran's objectives, right? The way it's targeted military bases and sites in the Persian Gulf, the GCC countries, and it's now going to be it's going to end up probably turning the GCC countries against America. They might now eventually, maybe that's a long game of Iran. Maybe that's a long-term goal of Iran to really kick out America from the GCC countries, and America realizes that it's time there. Its days in the Persian Gulf are numbered, right? So instead of America providing protection to the GCC states, Iran probably wants to be the one doing that, providing protection to these GCC states. Again, over 20% of the world's oil comes from that area, right? And a significant amount of oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz, which President Trump has said in a recent remark again that he wants to control. I don't know how that's possible, but Iran has successfully closed that, impeded, traffic through the strait. Significantly, through that strait, about 20 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz a day, right? And that's a that's a lot of oil. Again, but only about 10% of America's oil, 10 to 12% of America's oil comes from the GCC countries, comes from that area. Most of our oil comes from Canada. Now, of the oil uh, exports of the GCC nations, most of that and that region, that the Persian Gulf, most of the oil from that area, from the Strait of Hormuz, actually goes to Asia. Over 70, about 70% of the oil of the region goes to Asia. So Asia are the major, the Asian countries, Japan, China, South Korea, those India, those are their major clients, right? 70%, not America. America is not a major client. So, in fact, the amount of oil that America buys from that area is, it amounts to just about 5%. 5% of the total sales of the Gulf, right? Just 5% of their sales, of their business is American, less than 5%. So, for that level, as business people, they would do a cost benefit analysis, a trade off that for just the 5% of the business, right? The amount of disruption, the amount of risk, the amount of headaches that they're getting, is it worth it, right? So you see a gradual shift away, probably limiting the influence of America in that region. Um, that's a smart business move, right? That's actually a smart business economic move for them. Um, how to pull it off is another thing, right? Because now the method, the style of America and Israel is to just engage in acts of lawlessness like highway robbery, right? Um, that's the other that's the other challenge. So you can see America. A reason why President Trump is focusing more on the Western Hemisphere, right? To focus more on controlling the Western Hemisphere. It's happy to have Venezuela on its side because that's a significant amount of oil that it's got. It's got rare earth minerals as well and other things. And it's seeing its influence diminish in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf. The only other alternative is if America starts to move towards detente with Iran, more increasing rapprochement. And this was what appeared to have been going on, right, until President Trump had uh, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and his military leaders assassinated on February 28th, 2026. This appeared to be the general consensus, the general goal. This appeared to be what everyone was working towards. But the recent events do not, um, they're not encouraging. So yeah, so it's been a very costly uh, endeavor, a very costly war, and there's a huge reputational damage as well. In business, your reputation, good faith, you engage in business in good faith, right? Um, in the old days, in medieval times, whoever had the guns, the sword, the weapons, could just hold you at gunpoint. And that was how things were done. Law of the jungle, might is right. Now, but in the 21st century, post World War II, we had gone beyond that. Prior to World War II, that was what was going on, right? Japan seized assets, oil wealthy nations in Southeastern Asia, right? This was what was going on. But we created this rules based international order, right, with the United Nations, with all these bilateral and multilateral agreements. And America had done very well, ostensibly, but now we're being flagrant and with, again, move towards real politics because clearly we have the strongest military. But well, how long are we going to? Our strongest military is very costly. It's taxpayers' money. How long are taxpayers going to want to be burdened with such a very costly military that makes us appear as a threat to the world and then end up being threatened in the world as well, right? And they're all the rising powers as well in the world. There's a rise of China, and they focused on China is really focused on trade, on its economics, on boosting its manufacturing, on its living standards, which America should be doing as well, instead of putting our citizens and our soldiers in harm's way by encouraging further acts of terror, right? Because these smaller nations, right? They're not just going. America expects they're just going to fall down and die and fold up. No, they're not going to do that, because these are they have dignity. They're ancient people. They have a sense of dignity, and they're going to fight, and they can fight in asymmetrical ways, right? They're not going to meet us in the conventional battle formation. They're going to use all the means, and right now they're using economics, and that economics is affecting the purse of America's allies that are their neighbors. And those neighbors, notice, the GCC countries have not attacked Iran. They've not attacked Iran. That should tell Americans something, right? Anyway, I'm going to stop this video here, and I'll continue later on. Thank you. Bye.